Chapter 1. The Game Begins. Cleveland's inner city was a battlefield. From the cracks in the streets to the broken windows of long-abandoned buildings, the environment screamed one thing: survival of the fittest. The rules were simple: eat or be eaten. And in this world, the weak didn't survive long. Kendell K. McKinney had learned that lesson early. Standing on the corner of East 99th and St. Clair, he watched as the older hustlers did their business. He wasn't in the game yet, but that would change soon. For too long, Kendell had been a pawn. He wanted more: money, respect, power. He craved the control that men like Rico Big R. Johnson wielded. But Kendell was smarter than the average hustler. He wasn't going to make reckless moves. He'd been studying a book someone passed him a while back, The 48 Laws of Power. At first, he thought it was just a bunch of pretentious nonsense, but as he read deeper, he realized it held the blueprint for how to rise in a world like his. He wasn't the strongest, the fastest, or the most ruthless, but with the right strategy, he could control the game. His plan began tonight. "You sure about this, Kay?" his friend Dante asked as they stood together, surveying the scene. Dante had been with him since they were kids, loyal to a fault, but lately, Kendell could tell his boy was getting nervous. "I told you," Kendell said, pulling his hoodie tighter around his head. "We don't need to rush. You don't win this game by playing every hand at once. We let Rico think we're just his soldiers for now." Dante nodded, but the doubt lingered in his eyes. Kendell couldn't blame him. Rico was no joke. He ran the East Side like a king, and anyone who crossed him ended up either dead or disappeared. But Kendell wasn't planning to cross Rico. Not yet, anyway. Chapter 2. Law 1. Never outshine the master. Later that night, Kendell found himself standing face to face with Rico outside a smoky underground bar called The Spot. Rico, with his gold chains and a smug smile, leaned against a matte black SUV. Around him, a few of his enforcers laughed and chatted, keeping an eye on anyone who got too close. "Kid," Rico said, his eyes sizing Kendell up, "you ready to start making real money?" "Always," Kendell replied coolly, keeping his hands in his pockets. He knew better than to come off too eager. "Good," Rico said, handing him a small package wrapped in brown paper. "Handle this drop-off tonight. Don't mess it up." As Kendell took the package, he could feel Rico's eyes on him. Rico was always testing, always watching for a sign of weakness or disloyalty, but Kendell was careful not to give him any. Law 1 of power was clear: never outshine the master. If Rico thought for a second that Kendell was trying to get ahead of him, he would squash him like a bug. "Consider it done," Kendell said, turning to leave. Rico smirked. "You got potential, kid. Just remember who put you on." Kendell walked away without looking back. Rico might think he had control, but Kendell was already 5 steps ahead. Chapter 3. Law 3. Conceal your intentions. The drop-off went smoothly, just like Kendell had planned. He and Dante made their way to an old beat-up Chevy parked in an alley off Kinsman Road, exchanging the drugs for a fat wad of cash from a nervous-looking buyer. After the deal was done, Dante leaned back in the driver's seat, exhaling a long breath. "You think we're going to keep doing this forever?" Dante asked, his hands gripping the steering wheel. Kendell looked out the window, watching the shadows play against the walls of the alley. "No, but this is just the start." Dante frowned. "What's the next step?" Kendell smiled. "That's the thing, Dee. You don't always need to show your hand. Law 3, conceal your intentions. People don't need to know what's next. They just need to follow." Dante seemed confused, but he didn't press further. Kendell had always been the one with the plan. Even if Dante didn't understand it all, he trusted him. Chapter 4. Law 6. court attention at all costs. Kendell wasn't just focused on moving drugs or gaining street cred. He knew that to rise, he needed to become a name that people whispered about. He needed to get inside their heads and make them think he was more dangerous than he was. The perfect opportunity came at Club Raven, the hottest spot in the city. Rico's crew practically owned the place, and it was where all the big deals went down. Walking into the club, Kendell made sure to draw attention. He wasn't flashy, but his quiet confidence was enough to get people talking. He felt the eyes of the room on him as he moved through the crowd, Maya by his side. Maya was his girl, smart, beautiful, and just as hungry for more as he was. "Careful, baby," she whispered in his ear as they sat at the bar. "People are watching." "That's the point," Kendell replied, flashing her a grin. Law 6, court attention at all costs. Chapter 5. Law 15, crush your enemy. Totally, Kendell's rise wasn't going unnoticed. The more moves he made, the more enemies he gained. And one of the biggest was Big Nate, a ruthless kingpin who controlled the west side of the city. Nate had heard about Kendell's hustle and didn't like the idea of another player getting too close to his territory. But Kendell wasn't afraid. He knew the game too well. Law 15 was brutal but necessary. Crush your enemy. There was no room for half measures. One night, Kendell called a meeting with Nate's crew in an abandoned warehouse. Dante was nervous as they drove over, his hands white-knuckling the steering wheel. "You sure this is a good idea, Ke?" Dante asked. "Trust me," Kendell said, his voice calm. "Tonight's the night we make our move." The meeting started smoothly, but Kendell could feel the tension in the air. Nate's crew didn't like the idea of sharing any turf, and the conversation quickly turned into threats. Before anyone could make a move, gunfire erupted, and the warehouse turned into chaos. Dante and Kendell barely made it out alive, but when the dust settled, Nate's crew was decimated. The message was clear. Kendell wasn't playing games anymore. Chapter 6. Law 33. Discover each man's thumbscrew. With Nate's crew out of the way, Kendell turned his attention back to Rico. Rico had been the one to put him on, but now he was in the way of Kendell's full ascent to power. Kendell knew he couldn't just go at Rico head-on. Law 33 had taught him better than that. Discover each man's thumbscrew. Every man had a weakness, something that could break them. For Rico, it was his dirty dealings with the cops, particularly with Detective Jackson, a corrupt officer who had been on Rico's payroll for years. Kendell spent weeks gathering intel, learning everything he could about Jackson's connections to Rico and his vulnerabilities. When the time was right, Kendell approached Jackson outside a dive bar near the docks. The detective looked startled when he saw Kendell walking up to him. "What do you want, McKinney?" Jackson asked, his voice low. "I want to talk about Rico," Kendell said, his tone calm but firm. "And I want you to listen." Jackson hesitated, glancing around the empty street. "I don't have time for this." "You should make time," Kendell said, stepping closer, "because I've got something you're going to want to hear." And just like that, Kendell laid out his plan. Jackson listened, realizing that Kendell knew more than he should about the bribes, the hidden money, the shady deals. By the end of their conversation, Jackson knew he had no choice but to side with Kendell. Chapter 7. Law 23. Concentrate your forces. Kendell's final move against Rico was set in motion. With Jackson on his side, Rico's network began to crumble from the inside. The money wasn't flowing the way it used to, the trust wasn't there, and his grip on the east side started to slip. But Kendell knew Law 23. Concentrate your forces. When the time came, he had to hit hard and fast, leaving no room for recovery. He called a final meeting with Rico in an abandoned lot under a bridge, the cold Cleveland night adding to the tension in the air. Maya watched from a distance, her face filled with worry as Kendell prepared to face his former mentor. Rico arrived with his usual swagger, flanked by two of his most trusted men. His smile was thin, forced, and dangerous. Kendell stood his ground, his hands in his pockets, seemingly relaxed, but his mind was racing. Everything was riding on this moment. "So," Rico said, his voice echoing under the bridge, "you think you can take what's mine, huh? I taught you this game, and now you want to act like you're the one in charge." Kendell didn't flinch. He had spent weeks building up to this. He knew exactly what was going to happen, and Rico had no idea what was coming. "It's not yours anymore," Kendell said, his voice calm and steady. "You got sloppy, Rico. The streets need someone who knows how to run the game without letting it fall apart." Rico chuckled, but it was hollow. He glanced over at his men, but Kendell could see it, the uncertainty. Rico's empire was crumbling around him, and he knew it. "You're making a mistake, kid," Rico warned, taking a step closer. "You think you're ready to play at my level? You ain't got the heart for it." Kendell smirked. "That's where you're wrong. You should have seen this coming, Rico, but you didn't. Law 23. Concentrate your forces. I've got everyone you thought you had in your pocket working for me now. It's over." Rico's face twisted into a snarl. He reached for the gun tucked into his waistband, but before he could pull it out, Kendell raised his hand. A gunshot echoed in the night. Rico staggered backward, clutching his chest, his eyes wide with disbelief. Behind Rico, Detective Jackson lowered his gun, stepping out of the shadows with Dante and a few of Kendall's men.